Gaming as a medium has come quite a ways from its humble beginnings. Over these many years and throughout its many advancements, only a few classic franchises have managed to stay relevant for more than a few years or so. Even smaller is the group of elite sets of stories and characters that have seen themselves transcend the many gaming generations by putting out quality releases on every one. Of all of these lasting iconic game franchises, it's fair to argue that Final Fantasy has possibly the most reliable, dense, and lengthy winning streak of all. Starting all the way back when blowing on your games would get them to work, to now, the Final Fantasy series casts one of the longest shadows in gaming history over the medium. It's not difficult to see why. Throughout its existence, Final Fantasy has consistently delivered quality games, often as a standard bearer for its genre, and even managed to pull off a handful of great spin-offs, and some of its finer examples even formed their own sequels within their respective universes. Of these particular classic sequels in the series, many regard the 7th game in the series as the best. Even today, in the face of all the modernizations that have come since the era of pre-rendered backgrounds, blocky characters, and the speech bubble standard, Final Fantasy VII remains the ideal example of the series to many. Of the many reasons why Final Fantasy is as renowned as it is, the first that the biggest fans tend to mention is the story. While Japanese role-playing games and Final Fantasy as a series are well known for long, complex storylines and a wide spectrum of colorful characters, Final Fantasy VII took that to an extreme that was unmatched at the time. From destroying the massive reactor in Midgar to Sephiroth emerging as a villain who intends to use black materia to steal life force from the Earth in an effort to become a godlike creature, the main character's various internal crises, and the eventual destruction of Meteor and the salvation of the planet, the game's story is something to behold. But that's not all it has up its sleeves. Final Fantasy VII is just as full of massive structural twists as it is smaller moments of joy, heartache, and sheer hilarity. Propping the story up is a wealth of interesting characters like Tifa Lockhart, Barrett, Red 13, Professor Hojo, and of course Cloud Strife that are surprisingly deep, complicated, and at times conflicted in interesting ways. They all have their own problems and desires on top of the story, which was already excellent. Having both of these hemispheres of storytelling so well constructed was surely one of the game's strongest virtues. While multi-layered stories and a wide array of complex characters are elements that JRPGs were no stranger to in 1997, Final Fantasy VII served up a new standard for how far those concepts could go and how well they could be pulled off. On top of breaking new ground with its storytelling and characters, Final Fantasy VII totally smashes the ceiling in terms of its presentation and graphics. While the blocky, rudimentary character models and foreground objects are incredibly simple looking today, especially when juxtaposed with the gorgeously detailed backdrops, this was still a huge deal in 1997, with many games, especially in the JRPG genre, still heavily relying on flat 2D sprites to illustrate their games. Final Fantasy VII, despite some internal debate at Square about whether or not it was the right move, took a massive leap of faith into the polygonal 32-bit era with the Sony PlayStation. They passed up the Saturn and even the Nintendo 64 due to an emerging incline in production costs of cartridges, as well as being enticed by the awesome potential of the relatively massive amount of available space on CD-ROMs at the time. Thankfully, the gamble was executed well, and Final Fantasy VII would deliver a unique look and style for the game that was as revolutionary as it was excellent. The added development cost and time were clearly worth it for Square, as character models, especially the ones during the combat sequences, would look excellent for the time with lots of detail and charismatic animations during attacks, hits, and various other battle states. With this new plane of space to work with that the previous Final Fantasy games did not have, came lots of room for the developers to craft epic battle arenas and fascinating enemies as well. Everything looked great and it fit nicely with the tried and true turn-based Final Fantasy combat system. For the next few years, at least in the visual department, the designs and stylings of Final Fantasy VII would serve as a North Star for all other JRPGs to sort of aim for, despite most falling quite short for the remainder of that generation. So while the Final Fantasy series has clearly seen some fantastic games before and since the 7th entry, and while many contrarians will continue to try to convince the world that it's not nearly as great as the rest of us know it is, the game has remained one of the largest classics of the entire medium. Like most true classics, Final Fantasy VII brought people into its genre who weren't even fans of it before, and continues to provide a worthwhile experience to anybody interested enough to see it through well over 20 years after its release. Through its risky but wise gamble on the future of polygons to its formidable story and reliance on tried and true RPG gameplay mechanics, Final Fantasy VII is not only a worthy entry to its own series, it is, quite simply, one hell of a game. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.